Welcome to another series of Era of Anxiety. This next one we are going to be talking to my partner Brigita, the beautiful mother of my daughter, partner, soul partner, love partner. I found out early on in our relationship that she had some struggles when it came to anxiety. And so naturally, when I started doing this series, I knew that I would be talking to her. Yeah, here it is. This is a bit of a special one, isn't it? As you'll know from the intro, talk to Brigi about her experience with anxiety and how it has potentially shaped or formed or just been an influence in her life. Hi. So, when would you say was the first time you experienced anxiety? How far back would you have to go?
I didn't know it was anxiety. You know, when I was younger, you don't know that you have anxiety. That's just the way you are.
Yep.
And so looking back, I feel like I've always been anxious. I was an anxious child. There was just so much going on. And so I always just felt worried. There was always something for me to worry about.
Yeah.
I was always worried about my parents, what was, going to happen, or just in general, like day-to-day stuff. There was always something that I had to worry about, I felt like.
So at what point did you realize that maybe this anxiety was an additional part of you and not something that you might have been born with?
Like recently, I feel like I was an adult. Because I thought as a child, obviously you don't think, I didn't think about it. As a teenager, you're a teenager, so it's like, it's just part of life. As I was getting older, because I've always had some form of it, just gotten used to it, and then I never really questioned it until recently when people were talking about it. And because in the past I thought anxiety is, if people who have panic attacks or people who get physically ill. And I remember like my dad or even my mom, they would get panic attacks sometimes, and I thought, that's a really serious problem. That's what anxiety is. It's a serious issue.
Yeah.
I never knew that different ways to be anxious. There's different types of anxiety.
Yeah.
And so until people started talking about it and they were like, oh, well, it could just be this or that or small little thing. You're in a group of people and you feel anxiety, within if you have to go outside in public or, stuff like that. And I just thought, oh, isn't that just normal? Like some people are just like that. You just think, well, I'm just a bit nervous to do these things. The media or like a lot of, it's like in a glamorized version of it is what we see a lot of the time. Not glamorized, but like an over-exaggerated version is the only version I thought existed. And so I didn't know until like recently, until maybe when I met you, I think is the only time we had conversations about it. And I thought, oh, okay, so I have anxiety.
I think a lot of people downplay how bad their anxiety is because they've seen other people that have had a lot worse.
Yeah.
And then so you automatically think, oh, well, mine can't be that bad because that's what it really is. There's definitely like a fine line between healthy nervousness and like butterflies feeling and anxiety, and then even anxiety that gets in the way of your day-to-day life.
Yeah.
Would you say that you've had anxiety that has gotten in the way of you doing things? And if anxiety has gotten in the way, how has it kind of manifested in affecting your day-to-day life or certain things in your life that you didn't do because of anxiety?
It depends, I guess, on which parts of my life. It obviously it was different in different parts. When I was a teenager, it was so many things I didn't do because of that. For example, always worrying about what you say, like a lot of these, to me, it kind of overlaps with insecurities and confidence issues, but like to the extremes sometimes. So if it was something that I was nervous about doing, or I didn't think that I was going to be able to, participate in like the way that other people were, my friends were, for example, then I would never bother.
Yeah.
But I always thought that that's just a confidence issue.
Isn't low self-esteem caused by anxiety?
Yeah, I guess so.
And like not having confidence, that can be caused by anxiety? This is the interesting thing with anxiety. It crops up in lots of different
and it could be so
forms.
many different things. Because, for example, even though that's not kind of anxiety, that's why I never thought of it as anxiety. But for example, because I've always had issues with my skin, that was like most of my teenage years and young adult years. And there's so many things that I wouldn't do that after a while it just becomes normal and you're just kind of used to it. But because of how I felt about my skin, and it did give me anxiety, because if I wasn't put in a situation where I knew that I wasn't comfortable in, and it would have been like smallest little things, but you know, at the time I would just think that it's because I'm not confident enough or I don't feel good about myself. But because of those things I had anxiety.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like because I didn't feel good about myself, and it was to the extremes that I just wouldn't do things. I wouldn't go to the beach, I wouldn't go to the pool, I wouldn't go anywhere.
So you'd avoid all the circumstances that would make you feel anxious.
Yeah, I would avoid all the places where I knew that it was gonna be like okay, or like a sleepover, for example, with people that I, you know, if it was like a group of people, not just like one friend that I know really well, but it was like more people. And then I thought, oh my God, there's so many things that they could see that I don't want them to see about me.
Yeah.
That I don't feel good about, I'm self-conscious about.
So let's take this example, because this sounds like a really big one.
Yeah.
Okay. So from what age to what age would this avoidance of lots of situations because of how you felt about yourself, how long did that go on for?
It's similar. It would be from when I was like a teenager, not so much my early teens, because I was very sort of childlike as a teenager for a long time. So it didn't really start to affect me that much until I was like, I would say probably from about like 16 onwards until like recently, until I was in my late 20s.
So potentially like half of your life.
Yeah.
At its core, we're talking about anxiety has had an effect on how you do your day-to-day things, or socialize or interact with the world and for more than half of your life.
Yeah, and by anxiety, I mean, even though it's not the sort of anxiety that, I don't know, I didn't feel intensely sort of how I always imagined it. Like I didn't have, like I said, I didn't have panic attacks. I didn't have things that were just very obvious. But inside, I was always nervous. I was always on edge. Today is a great example because it even happens to this day.
Yeah.
Being in a social situation with lots of people, not even that many people, because of how my brain is, afterwards I keep going back, and I've always done this. I keep going back to what happened that day, replaying everything in my head and rethinking over and over and over and over, thinking it like, have I said something? Have I done something? Have I offended someone? Have I embarrassed myself? Because I used to do that all the time, because I would get so hyper and so like, then I would just like sit and just overthink and like overplay it in my head over and over and over. Today was just a reminder of it, because I didn't really have it today, but it was like it was creeping back a little bit, just because it's been so long since we were in a social situation with more than 3 people.
I mean, I recognized in a few people, and I had it as well, where I had social anxiety. It definitely crept back up.
Yeah.
And I think after this year of lockdown, a lot of people who were like anxious inclined, if you like, it was definitely...
Yeah, and it was going away the last few years, and then now it's kind of like...
Yeah.
You need to rework on it a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
to get back into it. But anyway, so that was something that's what I mean by anxiety, is just like overthinking and constantly worrying, and even though it's not intense like big jumps of it, it's constant.
Yeah,
it was always there, just nagging at you.
So because it's funny, because with social situations I get anxious before and during, but once it's over I feel relief.
Yeah,
but you're saying that
it's the opposite.
You
for
have
me.
It afterwards. You're excited before the thing, because you're looking forward to it. Then once you're there, you're kind of just in the moment. With waves maybe.
Yeah, and because I have zero space in my brain to think about what's happening, so I'm just experiencing the event.
Yeah.
But then afterwards I go back and it's like
funny.
And and today I had it a little bit, just because there was a lot of new people.
Yeah.
And it's been a long time since I had to think about how I am perceived by other people, even though I don't really care that much anymore. But it's been a long time since I was in a social situation like this, and so...
Yeah, and old patterns of
behavior. They do come back, because we had a few moments when I was kind of a little bit more sort of free, or a little bit more, myself, because normally in social situations I'm like, I can't be fully myself unless I really know the people around me. I would replay that in my head, and I would think like, oh my God, like I don't know. It's basically just the typical, oh my God, what must the people think of me? they must have perceived me, and because I've always had issues with that, how people perceive me anyway. I've been so many times told certain things like that I'm perceived in such negative ways, like in first impression.
Yes,
and so I
it's
think
a shame
that's
people
part
have
of it.
told you that, because that's a
because
horrible thing to have in your head.
That's part of it as well. But anyway, so that's what I mean by anxiety. It's like that sort of constant little like overthinking nagging at you. You're constantly just, it's like your brain never stops, which it doesn't anyway with ADHD, but it's like the anxiety part is just that it's just nothing pleasant about it.
Do you think because of, you were saying like when you're in social situations you haven't got enough space to do anything but be present, so it's afterwards that you're anxious? Do you think because of your ADHD and not having any space, that's partly why you get anxious afterwards? Because you don't feel like you've been able to
exactly.
think about what's going on in the moment?
Exactly.
You're just
it's like I can't
autopilot.
control it, because I can't really control how it all happens, what happens, how I'm reacting to things. And
so do you have an internal dialogue at social events, thinking and hearing yourself think, or are you just doing?
I'm just doing.
See, because for me, I'm constantly talking in my head.
Yeah. See,
Which
I
is
do afterwards.
Yeah, and you see, afterwards I'm relieved and the event's done.
Yeah.
That's funny. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So, where do you think this stems from? This.
That's going to be the hard part.
So, I mean, I can appreciate why you'd be avoidant of certain situations if you've got this, like, self-sabotaging thoughts and self-view of yourself with your skin especially. So that would prevent you going places. But after social events, having these negative sabotaging thoughts about, did I make a fool of myself? Did I do anything wrong? Did I embarrass myself? These like anxious thoughts, where do you think this has come from? And like, have you've had that since your teens as well? Mm-hmm. Because I think
yes,
a lot of teens have struggle with that.
Exactly.
So where do you think the self-sabotaging anxious thoughts come from? If you don't know, you don't know. Or if you don't want to talk about it, you don't talk about it. But like, don't talk about it if you don't want to go there. Because I think everyone that I'm talking to, there's parts where it comes to this point where they're like, throughout this series, I'm really looking for patterns. And I mean, I'm yet to do my story with anxiety, even though like it's overlapped everything that I've talked about. Yeah. But I definitely think one of the strongest patterns is going to be the childhood, the childhood experience.
Yeah. Well, I will say this. I will say that I think it's definitely something that comes partly from childhood. Different part of it come from different areas, because it starts from like the very basic, the very like sort of feeling nervous and worrying about things that comes from childhood, because as much as I had a great childhood, parts of it were things that I always felt like I had to worry about. My parents, obviously they got divorced eventually, so
How old were you when they got divorced?
I was 12 or 13.
Yeah.
Something like that.
And it was you and your brother, right?
Yeah, it was me and my brother. And so obviously they got divorced for a reason. So it wasn't, the best time for them. And I picked up, like all kids do, all kids pick up from what they see from their parents. And, both of my parents were struggling with different things. I know my mom had a lot of health issues, so I always was worried about her being ill. I was always worried about their relationship, because I could tell that it wasn't great, even as a young child. Like, obviously you don't know, but you can feel if your parents argue a lot. Yeah. And then my brother, I always felt like, even though he's 2 years older than me, because we're different, you know how like, we always looked at it as like, he's more sensitive than I am. I'm more sort of like, I have it together kind of thing. So even as a child, I always felt like I had to even worry about him. Yeah. And so I just felt like I had to worry about everybody in my family.
Do you feel like it was slightly overlooked that maybe you were struggling as well, but you internalized it more than your brother, for example?
Yeah, exactly.
Not to put blame on your brother, but your coping strategy was to keep it in.
It was just different. Yeah, exactly. It was different. He was the opposite. He was very much like, if he felt, emotional about something, you would see it. You know, he would lash out or cry or be angry or upset or whatever, whereas I was the opposite.
Yeah.
And that in turn then seemed like, okay, well, you're okay, then you must be all right. And then I kind of took that role upon myself as well. And so I think that's where the constant worry that sort of became normal then. And then obviously I think as you get older, you know, being a girl and then being a woman there's so many like external societal pressures that are put on you on top of everything, that if you have that kind of base, that kind of foundation, and then you pile all of that on top of it, because really, like, why was I so worried about my skin and the way I looked and the way I was perceived? It's like, obviously everybody is to some level, but as a girl, especially because as a little girl I was always told how pretty I was. You know, when that I felt like started to go away, it gave me even more.
Yeah, because I guess you would have had a lot of value on that because of external praising
exactly.
and stuff.
And so it's not that I wasn't really told, oh my god, you're so ugly, or your skin is disgusting, or whatever, that like much. It's not even about that. It's just I felt it. I was always praised for being, you know, such a pretty little girl, and then when my skin started to get really bad, it just gave me, you know, like, obviously it made me feel really bad about myself. And so anyway, that's another sort of, I was so worried about that because there is pressure, regardless of whether I was told as a little girl or not. As a woman, there is pressure to be pretty anyway.
So do you think there's a connection with, you know, how you were saying how you'd internalize your struggles, and if you were dealing with something that was difficult, you'd keep it in?
Yeah.
Do you think that's possibly why, as you got older, this internalization kind of became why you would recluse and not go to social events, and you wouldn't go to places, because it's almost like psychologically you reclusing in your head, so physically you start doing that as well.
It's like became a defense mechanism, I guess, in a way.
It's your way of dealing with situations.
Yeah, exactly.
So okay, so is it true to say that this anxiety and this internalizing issues has gotten easier in recent years, or do you still do the same kind of patterns as you used to when you were a teenager and in your 20s?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I think it's a lot of it is still there, but because I'm aware and because I am constantly working on myself, especially the last few years, especially since having Bella, it's just a whole other level of self-awareness you have to reach. I think it's mostly still there, but I've learned ways to deal with it. I try not to let it take over. I try to recognize it for what it is.
Because I guess in your teens and in your 20s, those coping strategies that you were doing, you were just doing them. You weren't aware of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas now, even though you might still use some of those coping strategies, you're watching it happen as opposed to just being it.
Such a huge part of my life have been my issues with my skin.
Yeah.
And what I was dealing with is that's something that, for example, in the past, that would stop me from, you know, going, so like just doing anything really, leaving the house and just
I think it's important to mention that we're talking about the skin on your face.
Right, yeah. Something that would stop me from doing anything, and like, you know, just day-to-day things, whereas now, you know, if I have those thoughts creep up, if I'm having a bad skin day or just a bad day in general, I can recognize that, and then I can talk myself out of it, because especially, like, this is such a cliche, but it's so true, that having a child changes so much and your perspective changes, and I just don't care as much anymore. So I have no problem.
So explain, how has your perspective changed? In terms of what? In relation
in terms
to
of, because I already was working on trying to not let the anxieties take over and keep me from doing things. I'm already working on that. But with having a child, I feel like the urgency is so much stronger. It's like I have to do things. I can't just say, oh, I'm just gonna have a day where I can't go anywhere. I can't do that with a toddler. Yeah.
So the urgency to make sure that Bella experiences things is more important than your own self-sabotaging thoughts.
And already, like I said, you know, I do work on it a lot, and I do, for example, on Instagram or just in social media in general, I do follow people who are very sort of positive about these things, and so I try to keep that kind of mindset around it anyway. And so if I do have a bad day, I still try to remind myself all the other great things that I am.
Yes.
that is got nothing to do with the way I look or my skin.
I think
or even within the way that I look other than my skin, there's so many other things.
So important, and
and that's something that I try to be mindful of anyway. But like I said,
I think that is literally rewiring the way you think.
Yeah.
And it's exercise.
Yeah, of course.
It's before you start putting it into practice, it's just a theory and it's just a concept, and that's as far as some people get.
Yeah.
And you can read all the self-help books in the world, but it's all theory until you actually put it into practice.
Yeah, exactly.
And when you start putting it into practice, then you get some of the benefits, and then when you do it long enough, it starts becoming more automatic.
Exactly.
And I think that's part of what this whole self-awareness thing is.
Exactly.
When it starts becoming like your default is always being aware.
That's exactly it, because it is not just with anxiety, but with everything that I'm working on myself. It is becoming default when it comes to dealing with, triggers, for example, or just anything, the day-to-day things that, day-to-day stuff that everybody...
So throughout your life, have you ever spoken to friends or family about, I want to see how much people are talking about it with other people?
Right. Not until, again, the last few years, I'd say.
Which is probably because you became aware of it more.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, because it's like, it's one of those things that up until everything that is wrong or different about my brain, up until like my mid-20s even, I thought it was just part of my personality, and it's just who I am, and I never questioned it, you know, even if I was struggling with certain things. Because I have never had conversations with anybody about mental health other than it, because it was always the extremes, you only ever see the extremes.
You never hear about the extremes.
And so I knew that I wasn't any of the extremes, and I thought, well, like I remember some people, they would have panic attacks. I've had friends or people that I knew who had panic attacks, or people would faint, or people would, get really sick. And so I always just thought, or if you have different sort of mental health problems that are very severe, or you're very depressed, or something that is harder to deal with on a day-to-day basis, that's what you hear about. Yeah. And so I just thought, this is just who I am as a person.
I kind of see a pattern with people as well, that most people downplay their own mental health issues. Yeah. And especially with anxiety, a lot of people kind of are sweeping it under the rug and going like, oh, it's not that bad, it's not that bad. But if you look objectively on your story, bad is the wrong word, but it's had a huge impact on many years of your life.
Yeah, right.
And so to some, they would say that it is an extreme.
Yeah.
To not go to an event or do this because of anxiety. Yeah. Anxiety is changing the way you live your life.
Yeah.
And that's bad enough.
It also teaches you that just because I don't have it as bad as somebody else does, it doesn't make my experience less valid, which is not something that I ever thought of before,
Definitely.
Yeah, of course I could live my life thinking like, oh, well, there are other people who are, having really serious issues and they can't leave their house ever, or they're going through, abuse or whatever, and that related anxiety. And like, of course, that's so much worse when you put it into perspective, but it doesn't mean that...
Worse for them.
Yeah, exactly, but it doesn't mean that what happens in my life isn't valid and to me, and it's important to me. And so this is something that, not to downplay anybody else's, but it is important for me was important for me to realize that. Yeah, and
I think often with mental health, people only go, oh my God, that's really bad, when it becomes a very visible thing. But you've got very high functioning depressed people, high functioning bipolar, high functioning anxious people, and they are all struggling every second of their life, and you would never know. Yeah,
everybody has their own stereotypes to overcome as well, but for me as a woman, like, definitely, how many times are girls told that they're just crazy and over emotional, and so you just think that's just what you are. It's the opposite for men. They're just told like the opposite.
Toughen up
and all that kind of bullshit. And you just learn to downplay it because you just think, oh well, I'm a girl, So all these things are just
we're all kind of taught to downplay it.
Yeah.
Anxiety is kind of a difficult one, isn't it? Because obviously with having a little one, there's lots of moments of nervousness.
Yeah.
But I think anxiety, you can define when it's an unnecessary fear that isn't needed. So, you know, if Bella's playing on a wall, anxiety is needed, but if she's, you know, playing with, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If it's an unnecessary need to be anxious, then that's the difference between being nervous and anxious, I guess. One of these really cliche, like, YouTube things where I ask you if you could say anything to your teenage self now, when you were really at the, you know, at the height of it being difficult.
If there was a way that I could make myself see that it's not my fault, not everything is my fault, not everything is for me to take care of and to be responsible for. I think that was a really big one, is to make myself see that it isn't my fault, and not to place the blame on anyone or people. It's just to take it off myself.
Yeah.
And to give myself a break.
Yeah.
I think just to give myself a break.
Cool. Thank you. That's it.
If I have to check.
Are we gonna eat?